Okay, next we have a story where, and I quite like the way that you framed this. We're talking about the Second Battle of Bosworth Field. um, and if you permit me, I'd like to give a little bit of context to this story. It's
Please.
Bosworth is the Battle of Bosworth is a tremendously important battle for British, well, English history in particular.
Mm.
And I always forget who lost. What was at stake in the Battle of
Well,
Bosworth Field?
basically, the English lost, the Welsh won.
Yeah, Henry VIII. Yeah,
Seven.
Henry the Seventh. Henry the Seventh.
Henry Tudor.
Henry the
Henry
Seventh.
Tudor.
Henry
Tudor.
Tudor. Yes.
Yes.
So yes, of course, yes, Henry Tudor. Although you say the Welsh won, the Welsh were then subsequently betrayed by Henry VIII and folded into as a principality to England's
But his
single
dad was born in
nationhood.
Pembroke Castle.
Oh, was he? Was he? Was he?
Yes.
Yes, and
Yeah.
then his son, the first Prince of Wales, Henry VIII, basically made Wales part of England. Anyway, so my nationalistic problems aside, it's an important battle
Very.
and a battlefield for the history of these islands and this island. Uh, but in recent years, in particular in the wake of the referendum on Brexit, there's been a strong stated desire in the UK to make it easier for certain types of activities to go ahead. One of those activities is planning process. The other one, in this instance, that is relevant is actually the development of autonomous vehicles. Once supposedly, so goes the theory, once we're free of European legislation that limits how autonomous vehicles might behave on roads, goodness me, saving lives, then actually the UK will be free to become a sort of a California Wild West of Europe, and actually enable these vehicles to be developed here, getting one foot in the door of an emerging technology market. In many ways, the idea is admirable, but in this instance, the execution is questionable because they want to build what looks to me like a giant tarmac, I suppose, pancake on part of the battlefield, as a space for these vehicles to manoeuvre and to be tested. Uh, is that an accurate representation of this problem?
Well, I mean, to be fair to the government, and as our regular viewer will know, I'm not often fair to the current government, in Britain at least. This issue of making the planning process smoother for developers has actually been going on before Brexit, before the Brexit
Oh, yes,
referendum.
yes, yeah.
Um, but certainly, it's certainly high tech development, or high tech R&D is something that we're good at in this country. We're very good at building satellites. This is a developing, an emerging technology. Leicester University, amongst others, has a strong research arm looking at computerized, the computerization of things like vehicles,
Hmm.
and management systems for roads and that kind of thing. So this country will be doing that kind of research anyway,
Mm.
and it certainly appears to be the case that the company behind this, Mira, are trying to develop a sort of Silicon Valley in Leicestershire
Yeah.
on what's actually a brownfield site. It's a former airfield site, of which the Battle of Bosworth is on the periphery.
Hmm. Hmm.
The battlefield of Bosworth, in heritage terms, as you hinted, and I know we were joking earlier on, but in serious heritage terms, Bosworth is probably one of the top three battlefield sites in the country in terms of their historical importance.
Well,
Hastings,
according to the Independent, I may be stealing your thunder here. The Battle of Bosworth Field in 1485 was the final major military engagement of the Wars of the Roses, and arguably one of the three most historically significant battles ever fought on English soil.
great
The
minds
others,
thinking alike.
exactly, the others being William the Conqueror's victory at Hastings in 1066, and Thomas Fairfax and Oliver Cromwell's victory over Charles I at Naseby in 1645.
Unfortunately, though, they were taking a very Anglo-centric view of it, and in fact, they missed out
Sort of
1746 Culloden,
They
which is the
did,
other one that I was going to mention. Okay, it's one of the top four, shall
Yeah.
we say, in terms of the historical and cultural significance,
Yeah.
because and in fact, for a long time, historians used 1485, the date of the Battle of Bosworth, August 1485, as a convenient cut-off for the end of the Middle Ages and the beginning of the Tudor dynasty, and therefore early modern Britain.
Yeah. So sort of linked to the Renaissance, this kind of thing.
Absolutely. I mean, some people argue, for example, that Bosworth marks the point that Britain stops being an offshore power and starts being a European power, partly because Henry Tudor, again, I was joking about the Welsh one, a large part of his army were actually French mercenaries. He was being supported from the continent as part of the power game that was developing in the early Renaissance between England, France, and Spain, with Scotland sitting somewhat awkwardly in between, and Wales as this former principality that was in the process of being subsumed into this monster called England, as Scotland would be 100 years later. So there's a lot stems from Bosworth. Plus, culturally, it's Richard III.
Yeah.
It's Shakespeare. It's a horse, my kingdom for a horse. It's iconic in cultural terms. Before you get into the historical significance.
Yeah.
Laurence Olivier, now is the winter of our discontent made glorious summer by this son of Yark, and so on. So. You can't get more significant in heritage terms of Britain, and yet, as you say, Mira want to build this test track, which it does look like a tarmac pancake.
Well, and
it's meant to be like it's like a giant skip pan almost, but it has buildings, it has control tower.
It is. It's like a skillet pan. Yeah, it's a giant skillet pan. I like that. Yes,
absolutely.
And so what? Just as we, I suppose, come to the close of this, it says here that 0.5 of the development covers the registered battlefield. 0.5% of the development covers the registered battlefield, or 16% of the total development size. However, this is from your article on the pipeline. However, if you relate this to the core of the battlefield, where the fighting actually took place, the development actually covers 1.8% of its total. Still not much, you might say, but ultimately, the fact that the development is only 900 meters. 0.57 miles from what is currently understood to be the heart of the fighting, it's going to have an impact. I mean, one of the key factors in terms of the preservation of historic sites, and this is actually an ongoing consideration, for example, in a big way at Stonehenge, is not just what happens to the thing, but also the context of the thing. And if you're within I don't know, a quick jog distance of the middle of the battle, you're going to be affecting the context of that battle, and also when future generations come and they don't know that thing wasn't there before, it will change their perception of why the field was chosen as a battle site, and so on and so forth. These places do have currency in terms of their physical context. But just to play devil's advocate, just quickly, because obviously I agree that this shouldn't necessarily happen in the way it's being proposed. But a battlefield is a battlefield, isn't it? It's a field, isn't it? I mean, arguably, it's a field. I mean, surely you could argue that almost any field has had something happen in it.
But the way heritage conservation and archaeological conservation works in Britain is that where it's on a sliding scale from not significant, you can do anything you like here, to this is so significant that in the national interest and the interest of future generations, we think this should be preserved. Battlefields fall into a very odd halfway house whereby there's a national register of the most important battlefield sites where historic England and Cadw and historic Scotland and so on have maps which say this is the Battle of Bosworth or Culloden, or Evesham or whatever, and it took place in this area, and this is the registered battlefield, and therefore development is controlled. And in fact, under the National Planning Policy Framework, it's stated that they have the highest level of significance and protection, but that protection isn't statutory.
No.
Therefore, a local planning authority like Hinckley and Bosworth in this case can actually take a planning decision which has national significance, but without referring it to national bodies directly.
Yeah.
Historic England can give advice, but they can't slap a preservation order.
Well, and just to put that, I suppose, in another system, in another governmental system, what you're describing there is the difference between, I suppose, a local or an advisory legal situation, I suppose state level, I guess, and federal. So basically, there's nothing. This doesn't have. There's no one in London who's gonna be bringing down a legal case on this issue. This is essentially a local issue and one that's.
A lot of my battlefield archaeologist colleagues tell me that in the States this would be a federal national battlefield park.
Yeah.
Very strict controls. The government would fund the interpretation centre and the rangers who looked after it, and so on.
Yeah.
We don't have that in Britain. The British system has grown up much more piecemeal, and in this case,
arguably, it's grown up with the people. People. There hasn't had to be statements along the lines of "you shouldn't build on battlefields." It just wasn't. It was presumed that actually this sort of protection wasn't required. That said, though, the fact that most of this development is in fact happening on a brownfield site, as opposed to greenfield, which is a protected band of countryside surrounding an urban landscape. Brownfield is actually open to development. It all raises questions about the designation of land and space. Definitely.
Well, I think that the key to this one, and this is where I think the argument is going to develop over the next few months. There's already over 10,000 people have signed a petition asking for this statement to be looked at. There were clearly issues with the process because a significant national stakeholder, the Battlefields Trust, only found out about it from the media 5 days before the planning committee was meant to make the decision at Hinckley and Bosworth, and 3 of those days were a bank holiday weekend.
Right. So it was it was no mistake then.
No. They were aware that a planning application might be put forward for part of the Bosworth site, but they had no details.
No.
And where normally they would have been, although they're not a statutory consultee, they work very closely with Historic England. Something happened. The comms didn't work.
No.
And so Battlefields Trust only found out about it very late, and they're actually pretty cross.
Yeah.
Just the final thing really, and this is a pure archaeological point.
Mm-hmm.
The Battle of Bosworth has already been relocated once. The original registered battlefield encompasses what was once thought to be the core of the battlefield, but the new research which people might have seen, which gave rise to the largest collection of round shot, cannon shot from any medieval battlefield in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
A beautiful little gold wild boar badge that was probably worn by one of Richard III's own personal staff, soldiers or personal retainers, because that was his family badge. Those were all found on this new site, which is very, very close to the site of the development. And in fact, the archaeology has been leading towards the area of the development, in particular a ridge of ground, which is just off the old Roman road, which battlefield historians now think is where Henry first saw Richard's army and made his own dispositions and then moved down from. So again, there could be very sensitive archaeology there. And as the landscape study report that has been submitted as part of the planning application says, that will be permanently lost to the battlefield site.
Well, and so that's actually a really good answer to that devil's advocate point of it's just a field. We know where the battle took place. You don't, do we? It's a haze. It's a haze of activity around a site.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. Well, incidentally, just my final point is that we'll link below to the Hinckley and Bosworth Borough Council planning website. There's a simple search little portal here, and we'll also put in there's a user reference number that you can put in.
That's right. Put in that reference number, and you'll be able to see all the documentation that's been put up in for the application, including a document that was put up by the Hinckley and Bosworth Planning Department. It was posted within 24 hours of the planning committee postponing the decision for a month, and within 24 hours they were able to completely dismiss every single complex heritage argument in a few paragraphs. People are not happy with the way this has been handled. And I think it is turning into something of a test case, because we are dealing here with a technology that the government wants to see developed. That they want to see technology parks like this, as we said right at the beginning of this segment. But at the same time, it's the first time really that a nationally important battlefield site has been impacted like this. At the same time, of course, we've got a very similar argument, as you quite rightly said, going on about the Stonehenge tunnel, and I'd also add Old Oswestry Hill Fort as well. Although
I mean, it should be said as well that I would love to see technology parks spring up across Britain. I think, at the moment this is the sort of thing that we need to be doing, but this is a litmus test as to how that will happen and where that will happen.
I think that's a crucial point. It's the point I'd like to leave our people who are watching this and maybe hopefully thinking about the issues that this raises. I think the real point is, archaeologists do not want to preserve everything. We know that you can't preserve everything. It's not practical. It's not even desirable.
No.
The world has to move on. People have to have lives in the present.
Mm-hmm.
The point about this is that testing, it's a couple of square kilometres of ground. It doesn't have to be there on that battlefield.
No.
I haven't made a case that they can't do it anywhere else. They've made a case that it wouldn't be convenient to do it anywhere else.
Yeah.
Different thing.
Yes, absolutely, yes. In that sense, convenience probably shouldn't really be a factor at all. It should be about all these other things, the totality of it. So, okay, well, we'll keep an eye on this, and of course we'll report back as and when there are any developments.